Yeah, so I'm Sophie. I work in the housing management team as a graduate trainee, and I'm supporting the refugee resettlement program. But I'm going to hand you over to our amazing host this morning, Brendan Morrow, to introduce himself, and then we can get going.
Thank you, Sophie. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Brendan Morrow. I manage the housing aspect of the No Recourse to Public Funds service here at Hammersmith and Fulham. And this presentation will explain. How housing and social care work in partnership to provide services and support for persons with no recourse to public funds. We have a series of slides just to run through to provide some information on how we support people with no recourse to public funds. So we begin with the first slide, Sophie, please.
Yeah, are they coming up on the screen?
No. Well, we have the first one, yeah. Can we have the second one, please?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so no recourse to public funds, what is it? It's an immigration condition restricting access to public funds under the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999. So we've had this legislation for over 20 years, and no recourse to public funds applies to people who are subject to immigration control. This means that anybody who has no recourse to public funds has no entitlement to assistance if they're homeless, to most welfare benefits, and to an allocation of social housing from the council's housing register. And when conditions are imposed, they are imposed by the Home Office, and they will relate to public funds and employment. This is when leave to enter or remain is granted. Next slide, please, Sophie. And who has no recourse to public funds? Non-UK nationals are required to have leave to enter or remain in the UK, unless, of course, they have some other right of abode or are exempt from immigration control in the first place. But anyone who doesn't have leave to enter or remain when they are required to do so will have this condition of no recourse to public funds attached. So some examples would be an asylum seeker, someone who has their application for asylum refused and they're appealing, illegal entrants to the UK, or people who have overstayed their visa. So depending on the type of leave that has been granted, different conditions will apply. So that will apply both to employment and to public funds. So for example, if limited leave to enter is granted to some people, they won't have recourse to public funds. For example, people on a spousal visa, student visa, work visa, or under family or private life rules. So that will mean that the expectation is that people who are issued with the no recourse to public funds condition will be expected really to maintain themselves without relying on other sources of income or services, public services. So that takes us on to what exactly are public funds. Well, in relation to housing, a housing is a public fund. So that means that anyone who has an NRPF condition attached has no legal entitlement to housing assistance, and also to the majority of welfare benefits, which include things like income support, job seekers allowance, housing benefit, universal credit, child benefit, and most tax credits. People with NRPF do have access to some services, and that includes social services support, National Health Service, schools, legal aid, and can claim some benefits jointly. For example, child tax credit and working tax credit. Obviously, if you're eligible to work, you can claim associated working tax credit benefits. So it's a very complex arena. So legal advice from an immigration advisor should always be sought if anyone is unclear about what they cannot claim. So what happens if you have the NRPF condition and are threatened with homelessness? Well, under the Housing Act 1996, which is the main piece of legislation for and relating to homelessness, the council can only lawfully help households who are eligible for assistance. Obviously, those with no recourse to public funds are not eligible. So the council's duty towards people with no recourse to public funds is very limited, and that restricts their access to housing. So the no recourse to public funds service will or has got the capacity to provide limited support and accommodation for households who are homeless, who are at risk of destitution and have significant ongoing needs. And the council can only consider providing accommodation and subsistence following an assessment of need in specific circumstances. So this really is where two different scenarios. One where there's a child in the household, or secondly, where there's an identified care and support needs, and in both scenarios to avoid destitution. So the first assessment would be under the Children Act 1989 for families, or if it's for single adults, the assessment would be under the Care Act 2014. So if we look at what assistance is available to families in the first place, the council may have a responsibility to accommodate and provide financial assistance to families with NRPF, to safeguard the welfare of children in need, and that is set out in the Children Act 1989. So initially what happens is an assessment may be conducted by Children's Services under Section 17 to establish if there's a child in need. And if that has been established, then the council must use its power to provide accommodation and financial support to meet the child's needs if the household is destitute. The council's NRPF team work in partnership with social care, that's adult social care and children's services, to arrange for accommodation and financial assistance to be provided and managed in these circumstances. Similarly, there is support and assistance available to single adults with no recourse to public funds. Again, there's an assessment under the Care Act. So in addition to a single person being homeless and at risk of destitution, they must also have eligible care needs. So the council's adult social care team will undertake a needs assessment for a person who has been identified as in need of care and support. And if the assessment finds there are care and support needs, then accommodation and subsistence will be arranged by the housing part of that team, which is my team. Accommodation, when it is provided, is funded by social care and is usually self-contained, B&B type accommodation, and outside of Hammersmith and Fulham, generally because of costs of accommodation within the borough. So following a social care assessment, where it's been agreed that the criteria is met, the no recourse to public funds service will provide and manage accommodation for the duration of residence and provide any housing related support. For example, any issues with the landlord or the accommodation that need to be sorted out. The support will usually remain in place until the Home Office grants a change of conditions application. A change of conditions application refers to when the no recourse to public fund condition is removed. This can actually take months or more usually actually years for this condition to be removed. by the Home Office. So once accommodation is provided, it's usually for a long-term period. In addition, children's services and adult social care will provide appropriate support, whether there's a child in need in the household or whether there's a vulnerable adult. And then eventually, once the no recourse to public funds condition is removed, the household are able to apply directly to the local authority for housing assistance and for mainstream benefits. And at that point, the no recourse to public funds service will cease. During the current pandemic, Hammersmith and Fulham have led responses to protect residents with no recourse to public funds and have provided emergency accommodation under the government's Everyone In agenda. This is generally for people who need accommodation, who are homeless, who are rough sleeping, or otherwise unable to comply with self-isolation requirements. The service also signposts to night shelters, usually in the wintertime, and food banks to provide short-term emergency respite. The service also signposts to employment that people are eligible to work. We have a partner agency called Beam. We can signpost people to Beam. There'll be another presentation on Thursday by Beam, so look out for that one for further information. And also signposts for legal advice to authorised and regulated immigration advice providers. And some recent developments within the NRPF legislative area. In April this year, the High Court found that the no recourse to public funds policy is unlawful when a case was brought before it, because it disregards the government's statutory duty to provide and promote the welfare of children. So as a result of this ruling, the immigration rules are expected to be amended, which may mean more support for low-earning migrant parents to access state support like child benefit or universal credit. Obviously, at this point in time, we're still awaiting changes to the immigration rules and any further guidance which may come with it to reflect this judgment. At this point, we haven't heard anything further, but hopefully this year there will be published changes. Thank you for that, Sophie. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. So please let me know.
Okay, but we have a question here, Brendan.
Good morning, Mr. Brendan. You know, you say
Hi.
Yeah, the CARE Act 2014, yeah, and it doesn't really explain much. To me, what you're saying is the basic what you basically tell anybody. And my question is, what is a care need? What is care needs? And
well, you're in the right place, because we're going to have a presentation just directly after this one, which will explain exactly what you're asking. My colleague from Adult Social Care, Karen, is going to join directly after me. My purpose here is to give an overview of the service and how it all connects and interrelates. But just stay where you are, and we will have a presentation by Karen, who will be able to explain exactly what care and support needs are in relation to single adults.
Okay, I've got 3 more questions as well. You said as well something. It's along the adult social care, but what do you people class as vulnerable adults? Ain't again just like a vulnerable children, right?
Well, they're two different assessments. One will be an assessment of a child in need, and for adults, it will be whether there are, generally speaking, where there are any assessed vulnerabilities in relation to what is set out in the Care Act. And as I say, Karen will be better placed to answer your questions on adult social care assessments.
Also, what is, you mentioned Act 1989. I never get to read the slide properly.
Okay, 1989. That's a Children Act. So that's where if there's a child in need in the household, then the local authority would be expected to provide accommodation and or subsistence support if the family would be destitute as a result.
That's what I was going to ask you, because isn't it similar to the word destitution? The same destitution.
Yes, yeah, you're right in that aspect. That destitution is part of the criteria. So, you know, in association with that, obviously people have to be homeless and at risk of destitution, not actually destitute, but at risk of destitution. And there has to be a care need. There has to be an assessed care need.
So why is it that you have to class it as a care need? The person don't have to have a care need if the person is in destitution.
Well, again, this yeah, I understand what you're saying, but this is the legislation, and this is the way that the council are legally obliged to assess under the Care Act.
Well, I've been to the council and asked them for the social care, same destitution I'm under, and they literally turned me away. So what is the sense of even this meeting to me?
Well, the sense of the reason behind you know, the presentations are to explain to people how the council is legally obliged to make assessments. You know, the council is subject to the relevant legislation, whether it be homeless legislation, whether it be the Care Act, whether it be the Children Act. And there are certain parts of the legislation that the council have to consider. And if people meet or do not meet the criteria. So hopefully Karen will be able to enlighten you a little bit more on exactly what is assessed under the Care Act for adult social care assessments.
Okay,
thank you very much. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brendan. Has anyone else got any questions? And please feel free to put them in the chat if you'd rather ask them that way, and we'll make sure that they get answered.
Yeah, I was wondering if there is a risk that we had a family who were actually quite worried that if they would do a child in need assessment, the Home Office would kind of find out a bit more about them, and because they overstayed their visa, that would have implications. Do you know if that's correct?
Just say that again, Maria, please.
So they had we had a family who overstayed their visa. And they were worried that if there would be a child in need assessment, the Home Office would find out a bit more about them, and there would be a risk that actually it would impact, well, their whole living. They might be sent back. All those kind of worries. Do you think that's?
Well, if what other worries?
I think their main worry is that they would just be sent back to their own country because they overstayed their visa and they applied for child in needs.
Yeah, but I mean, I think again, for those types of cases, it is still possible for an assessment to occur under the Children Act, regardless of whether or not people have overstayed their visa. You know, so it's still possible for accommodation to be provided in theory, But again, it depends on each individual case, and we'd really probably need to know the details of each individual case before. And this is the reason for the assessment, because the council really would need to do an in-depth assessment in each scenario to establish what the circumstances were. But potentially it's still possible to provide accommodation if there was a child in need in the household and the family were destitute and they're likely to be homeless, regardless of whether or not they've overstayed. But again, I'm just generalizing because we don't know the full details of the case or the circumstances surrounding it. I mean, again, there is the potential to get independent legal advice from someone who's a solicitor regulated by the Law Society, or an immigration advisor who is registered by the Office of the Immigration Services Commissioner. In either scenario, I would advise, if possible, to get some immigration advice. But at the same time, it's still possible, potentially, for accommodation and a support to be provided. So just because people have overstayed their visa doesn't necessarily mean that it's not possible.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, if we have no further questions, I think we can move on to our next presentation. But if you do think of any questions in the meantime, please post them in the chat, and we'll try and make sure that they are answered. Thank you, Brendan, for that. That was really helpful.
Thank you. Okay.
Is Karen on the call from Adult Social Care? I'll just pull, she must be joining us in a minute. I'll just pull up her presentation. So I think adult social care will be joining us in a second. But just to, so we don't have any more delays, we can start running through their presentation that they've provided. So we're going to be talking about accessing support under the Care Act for people with no recourse to public funds. So in terms of Care Act assessments, there are thresholds to be met for in which cases the assessment would be conducted. So Section 9 of the Care Act sets out the threshold to carry out an assessment of an adult. So the threshold is particularly low, where it appears to a local authority that an adult may have needs for care and support. The local authority must assess whether the adult does have need for care and support, and if the adult does, what those care needs would be. So in the case of single people with no recourse to public funds, if they do have care needs, then the local authority would carry out an assessment to assess what those needs were and how they could be met. So the local authority carries out the assessment regardless of whether or not they think the individual is eligible for support, either due to financial resources or lack of, or they are ineligible for public funds due to their immigration status. So the duty to carry out an assessment will likely be triggered by a referral from a charity or third sector organisation. So in terms of carers assessments, a local authority may also have a duty to assess whether a carer for someone with care needs may also have need for support in caring for an adult. So this threshold is similarly a low one. So where it appears to a local authority that a carer may have needs for support, whether currently or in the future. So the assessment must assess the following: whether the carer is able and is likely to continue to be able to provide care for the adult needing care, whether the carer is willing and is likely to continue to be willing to do so, and the impact of the carer's needs for support on the matters specified in Section 1 regarding well-being. And finally, the outcomes that the carer wishes to achieve in day-to-day life, how those are being impacted by their role as a carer, and whether, and if so, to what extent the provision of support could contribute to the achievement of those outcomes. So that could be, a whole range of outcomes for their day-to-day life, and which kind of the vagueness of the legislation kind of outlines how low the threshold for an assessment is. So the requirement in terms of human rights, the requirement to consider the care and support of eligible asylum seekers and others, such as people claiming to be EU nationals, or those insisting that their human rights have been breached, and others kind of with no recourse to public funds, continues under the Care Act. So even though individuals may have no recourse, they are still eligible for support if they have care needs or if they are a carer. So our offer to individuals and their carers will therefore recognise and respect that they are people first and foremost. We will then complete a Care Act assessment as a local authority within our agreed timeframes. So the assessment will be informed by the person's self-assessment, if provided. The local authority will then analyse all the evidence and the law before determining next steps, which includes whether the person is eligible for funded care and support. So considerations. There is an expectation that the requirements of the Human Rights Act and European Community treaties will be considered whenever a decision with human rights implications is under consideration. In particular, the following articles from the European Convention may influence many aspects of the care and support that we provide. So Article 3 is an absolute right and covers inhuman treatment, degrading treatment, inhuman punishment, degrading punishment, and torture. Article 8 is a qualified right and grants a right to respect for private and family life, home and correspondence. The right to respect for private life can include respect for medical issues. And Article 9 is a qualified right and grants a right to freedom of religion, thought, and conscience. This includes the right to practice religious beliefs. So these are all factors that will be considered when making an assessment, and the type of care and support that we provide. So that's just to give you kind of a bit of a summary of our kind of duties under the Care Act to provide individuals with no recourse to public funds support, and for the local authority to conduct assessments. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, and we will try our best to answer them.
It's like basically the same question from before. What does it mean when what the Care Act 2014, what is care needs, and how do you specify does an adult needs a care need? And as you said earlier, the same in your slide, section B, what does that really mean? Because how can you tell, how can a person, if a person you say they don't add up to the care needs, how can a person know what is the care need for oneself?
So, Sophie, hi, sorry I was late, everybody, apologies. Hi, I'm Linda Jackson. I'm the Director of Commissioning and Strategy for the Council. Thanks, Ben, that's a really good question. So when we talk about Care Act, it's a bit misleading really, because what we're talking about is people's ability to get on with their daily lives. Okay, so people may have disabilities, which mean they need additional support to get on with their daily lives, or to support them in their parenting responsibilities. It's not something that you could say one size fits all, because everybody obviously is individual. So, and that's where the assessment process is really, really key. So to enable us to understand how someone is eligible, we have to take people through a Care Act assessment, and that covers a range of topics, including looking after yourself physically, how you are mental health and well-being generally, what's important in your life. But what we do is take what we call a strength-based approach. So what that means is that we don't just think about things you can't do. We think about things that you can do with existing help that you've got. And our responsibility is to make sure that we are able to help you continue to keep those links, if that makes sense.
Not really.
It doesn't make sense.
No, not really, because I myself have been there for the social care assessment.
Yeah.
No one seemed like they were wanted to assist me, or as you just said, like you pinpoint certain what it really means. No one in like the council seemed like they had a better idea of what, if you're not crippled per se, or you can't do anything, it's like you don't get no assistance. You have ample able-bodied people but do need assistant care. You understand me? But no one seems to look at them because they are not disabled or they can't do anything for themselves. But there's loads of people what needs that assistance.
But part of the responsibility is about signposting to information. It's not always about doing things for people, and we have to be very clear about that. We are not here to take over in people's lives. We are here to signpost and facilitate, to enable people to access services that they can do themselves. So unfortunately, I think if people think that by having a Care Act assessment that they will then end up with a service, that's not always the case. I have to be very clear about that. It is about, as I said earlier, about how we can help you stay as independent as possible, working with the people that are important to you, and also working with people in your communities and how you can engage with other people in your communities as well. I can see my colleague Karen's been able to join us as well. Karen, we're just talking about a Care Act assessment and the fact that it's not necessarily that somebody who has a Care Act assessment actually ends up with services, that they may actually end up with information and advice, not necessarily actual services. I don't know if you want to comment, Karen.
Yes, I do apologise. I've had some IT issues. I've been panicking a little bit, so sorry about that. But yes, following an assessment, we may well signpost. There's a number of agencies in the community that will support any sort of unmet need that we identify during the assessment.
Okay. Any other questions? Sorry, Sophie, I missed your intro at the beginning. I apologise.
Sorry, I was on mute. Don't worry. We just went through kind of Karen's presentation. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat or just shout them out. And we'll try our best to answer them.
I had a question. Wait, I'll put on my camera. Probably better. Does it happen that you actually provide housing as well for somebody who has care needs, or is that something that actually rarely happens?
Yeah, yes, we can do so. We work closely with Brendan's team to ensure that if housing is required, or if there's a placement that is required when somebody has nursing or residential care and support needs, we would look at that and ensure that they're in the safest place that we can procure a bed, or it may well be that we put somebody into bed and breakfast, which we have done in the past.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions before we close? So we've got a question in the chat, Karen. What is the best way for people to access this service or assessment?
Right, okay, so they can either phone in on 0208 753 4198, and that's option 3, or they can email in to community response reablement at lbhf.gov.uk.
And then if someone does get in touch with, then can they expect a call back to arrange the assessment?
Absolutely, yes. So we would look at whether we need to do a face-to-face or we could do it by telephone. So we would definitely do that. And normally we're able to get back to them within 48 hours. If it's urgent, then things are read within 4 hours of landing into the email inbox. So yeah, we're pretty good at doing that at the moment.
Great. And do you have, I know it might be hard to give a rough estimate, but what's the sort of time frame for getting that assessment done and then getting the result of that?
Well, we can let the person know when we finish the assessment whether they have eligible needs. So we can do that straight away. And then we would build a care plan if they have got unmet need and they are eligible, on how the local authority is going to meet that unmet need. I suppose timeframes for doing the assessment obviously would be up to the person when a convenient time is available. So we offer that. And normally within doing the assessment and the care plan, if a service is needed, we can put that in very quickly if required. So it can be a couple of days.
Great, that's really useful to know. Do we have any further questions for Karen or for Brendan?
Yes, I think we've got another one here.
It's going back to the human rights what you read out earlier, and I think one of the questions what you put, and I've never known it, you said, what do you mean you have mean insisting that their human rights are breached? That's one of the questions what I think the immigration putting down, to say, if you don't insist that your human rights have been breached, you don't get nothing. So you mentioned it earlier in the human rights slide, what you done. And I think that was before you said something about Article 3 or something like that.
We would look at human rights, absolutely. So if it triggers a human rights assessment, we would do that. So it's having a conversation with the social worker to give a bit of background to a person's, I suppose, journey, and whether, you know, that would trigger us to do one. But we can do a human rights assessment. We do get referrals from a number of agencies who are acting on behalf of that person.
Okay. Well, I've never seen anybody really consider a person's human rights, because even you're saying it's about the caring of a person, it is still an individual human rights, right?
Absolutely, and I'm sorry if you've not been offered a human rights assessment, but we can absolutely do one if it is required. As a local authority, we must consider when we need to do one. Absolutely, it's a duty. We must do it.
But as I said, like before, I've never heard that one before. So that's why I'm just trying to see what does it follow and what does it undertake.
Well, are you able to give me a call after this, and then I can talk you through it in more detail? Would that be helpful for you?
Me?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, if you let Sophie, if you can get the gentleman's details, and then I can do that later today.
Thank you, Miss Carr.
Yeah,
that's okay.
Great. Do we have any final questions before we close for Karen or Brendan? If you do think of any
earlier,
yep.
The NRPF, yeah, it said at risk of destitution and have significant ongoing needs. What again does that entails?
Brendan, do you want to answer that?
So can I just repeat that one, Ben, please? Ben, could you repeat that question, please?
Are you able to repeat the question? Ben Humphreys, are you able to repeat the question? Or is it, sorry, is it Andre? Are you able to repeat the question? If we have no further questions, please do get in touch if you do. Just so you're all aware, the session is being streamed on YouTube, so you can access it if you would like to rewatch. We're also running a series of virtual events throughout the week to mark Refugee Week. But I would just like to say thank you all for coming. And a really big thank you to Brendan and also to Karen. I know you've had some IT issues today, but yeah, we really appreciate you coming and presenting and answering people's questions. So thank you very much for that, and enjoy the rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.